The lady of the board, the crown of the king, and the king of the battlefield. What would chess be without its queen? Well, it turns out that during a big part of its history, chess did not have a queen at all, and in most of its variations around the world, it remains without one. It wouldn't be until the Middle Ages that this reckless woman would set foot right beside the king and plant the seeds of a revolution that would take the world of European chess by storm. How did this happen? This is Ancient Gaming, and that's precisely what we will be answering today. Virtually every piece in the chessboard has seen a variety of different names and interpretations since Chaturanga first made its way to Europe, some with more success and some with less, and some of such variations still persist today. For instance, of all of them, the bishop is the one that has seen by far the widest degree of variations, which is understandable since hardly any European understood that the Arabic alfil meant the elephant, let alone had seen or even know what an elephant was at all. Alfil actually is how we do still name the bishop in Spain, and I would bet that most of my fellow countrymen ignore that this guy used to have a huge trunk. Well, the same happened to our distant European ancestors, who initially had a hard time translating the Muslim game. Usually, when chess was adopted by new peoples, the intelligible names were translated, while the unintelligible ones were borrowed. Some, like the Firz, were quickly identified with the horse and, by extension, with the feudal knight, but the meaning of others became generally unknown or was directly forgotten. This was the case with the rook, a word that was borrowed from the Persian rook and that designated the armored chariots commonly used in ancient warfare when Chaturanga originated. I made a whole video about Chaturanga, by the way. There you can see an in-depth explanation about its history. So what was our dear damsel called before joining the board? Her name, or rather his name, was the Farzin. This again is a Persian word that designates a kind of royal counselor or wise man. It was adopted by the Persians early on in chess history as a substitute to the original Sanskrit mantri, also from Chaturanga, and would eventually be shortened towards the medieval period into Firz or Firz. Historically, the Farzin enjoyed a prominent position within the Sassanid monarchies, often acting as a de facto ruler, and his role would be inherited by the Oriental caliphates in the figure of the vizier, and later by the Hajib in the Eastern Muslim kingdoms of the early Middle Ages. We have no means to pin down the exact place or places where chess first made its way to Christian Europe, but it is commonly believed it happened through Spain or Italy somewhere between the 8th and early 9th centuries, since both Italy and especially Spain were an entry point and often coexisting ground between Muslims and Christians. However, the first written evidence we have where the game is mentioned comes from Switzerland. It belongs to a Latin medieval poem preserved in the Einsiedeln monastery titled Versus des Kakis, or Verses on Chess. The manuscript describes everything one needed to know in order to play the game, and also includes our first mention of the queen as a chess piece under the name Regina. But the piece would eventually adopt a wide variety of names like Femina, Mulier, Virgo, Domina, etc., sometimes as a way to reconcile the issue of the potential scenario of having a king with multiple wives on the battlefield. But her inclusion into the game was by all means homogeneous among the European kingdoms, at least at an early stage. In Spain, for example, the Muslim name for the pieces saw a longer life, and by the end of the 13th century, the Firz was still present in the game as the alferza, a derivative of the Arabic al-Firzan. The Libro del Ajedrez of Alfonso X is a remarkable source in this regard and shows how by its time the meaning of the Arabic word had been largely lost or misunderstood even for the Western Muslims, as it had been conceptualized as a standard bearer and partly confused with the horse or al-Faris. In the rest of Europe and the British Isles, both the German, Italian and the Spanish nomenclatures for the pieces would clash and sometimes coexist. The queen, nevertheless, was not unknown in the Iberian Peninsula and is even found together with the Firz in some European manuscripts, also as a way to distinguish the original queen from the promoted pawn. In any case, it would only be a matter of time before the queen finally established herself as the preferred name for the piece in Europe. So, more or less, we know how this change happened, but why did it happen? A recurrent theory states that the appearance of the queen as a substitute for the Firz happened as a consequence of an increase in power by some female political figures of the time, such as Adelaide of Burgundy or Emperor Stephano. This thesis largely stemmed and was popularized by Marilyn Yalom's book Birth of the Chess Queen, which treated the piece as a somewhat icon of female power. But Yalom's work is largely speculative and provides little actual evidence to support this thesis. The truth is that we don't have clear sources that explain this change, and it may very well be explained simply by the fact that European chroniclers translated a nomenclature they barely understood into a symbolic representation of the medieval state. The closest we get to an explanation for the meaning of the pieces are the recurrent poems, analogies, and allegorical literature that sometimes mentions chess or use it as a means to delve into societal topics or a particular event. These are a nice window through which to take a look upon the social customs and philosophy of the time, but hardly a useful source regarding the actual historicity behind the meaning and purpose of the pieces. But the name of the queen is not the only change that puzzles chess historians. The biggest change, and the one that would transform the game forever, is her movement. See, the road to the current modern chess rules is a long and complex one, and chess players would not start to see an homogeneous pattern until the later part of the Middle Ages, around the 15th century. Before that, what we do have is an heterogeneous picture of different movesets, names, and special instances with regards to certain pieces, starting moves, or promotion rules. These rules often had a local nature and differed from one place to another. They are known as the assizes, the most known being the Spanish ones, the Lombards, and the Germans. In most of them, the Firz, or the queen, did not move the way they do today. Instead, the piece was allowed only one diagonal movement, sometimes extended by a leap if moving for the first time. Differences aside, these assizes would eventually settle fixed localized rules in their respective areas, but the experiment was far from over. By the end of the 15th century, a new variety would take the world of European chess by storm, to the point that the previous rules or ways of playing chess would start to be referred to as the old chess, or other names like Scacchi all'antica, Ajedrez del Viejo, etc. The new variety introduced a radical change, and it would spread rapidly in Southern Europe and completely change the character, strategy, and pacing of the game. It adopted different names, but the one I think best captures the essence of this change was the so-called Scacchi della Donna or alla Rabiosa. In this new form, the previous rules of the local assizes remained largely unchanged, but the bishop and the queen would see their movement expanded to the way they move today. Again, Yalom interpreted this change in light of other prominent queens like Isabel of Castilla or Eleanor of Aquitaine, but the ortho-diagonal move can much better be explained simply by a gameplay perspective, especially if put in contrast with the evolution of the other chess pieces, which in one way or another also saw their movement expanded in the course of the Middle Ages. For this, a history of chess of our old friend Murray proves yet again to be of enormous value. He says, "The intention behind the early experiments is obvious, because all the alterations of move were directed towards the improvement of one portion of the game. They show that the European player, unlike the Muslim, felt some disappointment with chess. The game was long in coming to a point, and the tactics of the prolonged opening play were by no means easy to discover. In short, chess was too slow for the average European player. In fact, if you are used to modern chess, it may very well be too slow for you as well. My suggestion is for you to go to chess.com and try it by yourself. There you can play Chaturanga with people around the world." And that is everything I have for you for today. So thank you for spending your time with me and this lady. As you see, she has indeed a lot to tell. And with that, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you want to learn more about other old games and how to play them. And if you want to go that step farther, share the video, that would really help a lot the channel. Until the next time.